August 29th, 1944. 20 miles south of Chartres, France, Corporal Jimmy Dalton sits in the cab of a deuce and a half, staring at a hand-drawn map that contradicts every official route marker on the road ahead. His convoy, 238 trucks carrying 2,400 tons of fuel, ammunition, and rations, is scheduled to follow Highway N23 through the Beauce Valley, straight to Patton's Third Army. Fast, direct, approved by Transportation Corps headquarters, but Dalton's hands grip a different route, one that adds 40 miles and 3 hours through farm roads nobody's driven since the Germans retreated. His convoy commander called it stupid. His fellow drivers called it cowardice. In 6 hours, when German paratroopers ambush the main highway and destroy an entire convoy, those same men will call him a prophet. Right now, he just calls it a hunch that won't shut up. Before we continue this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from. Which city, which state? I'm curious to know who's brave enough to discover what happened when one truck driver's instinct saved an entire supply operation from annihilation. The story begins not with Dalton, but with a problem nobody in 1944 wanted to acknowledge. The Allied advance across France was moving faster than its supply lines could support. When American, British, and Canadian forces broke out from Normandy in late July, planners expected a methodical push toward Germany, measured in miles per week. Instead, General George Patton's Third Army raced across France like a prairie fire, covering 400 miles in 2 weeks. His tanks consumed 400,000 gallons of fuel daily. His artillery fired 8,000 shells per day. His troops needed food, medical supplies, ammunition, and replacement parts in quantities that strained every logistics system the Army possessed. The English Channel ports, Cherbourg primarily, sat 450 miles behind the advancing front. Everything Patton needed had to travel that distance by truck because rail lines lay destroyed and airfields couldn't handle cargo volume. The solution emerged from the Transportation Corps, a dedicated truck convoy system running 24 hours daily, using every available vehicle to create a continuous supply stream from Normandy to the front lines. They called it the Red Ball Express, named after railroad freight terminology for priority shipments. The operation began August 25, 1944, with 132 truck companies, approximately 6,000 vehicles. The trucks themselves were workhorses, not racehorses. GMC CCKW 2.5-ton cargo trucks, deuce and a halves in driver slang, powered by 270 cubic-inch six-cylinder engines that made 104 horsepower. Top speed, 45 miles per hour on good roads, less when fully loaded. Each truck could carry 5 tons of cargo, though drivers regularly exceeded that limit. Multiply 6,000 trucks by 5 tons each, and the Red Ball Express theoretically could move 30,000 tons daily. Reality proved messier. Mechanical failures, driver fatigue, traffic jams, and German harassment reduced actual throughput to 12,000 tons daily. Still a remarkable achievement, but barely sufficient for Patton's appetite. The convoys ran on designated routes marked with red balls painted on signs every mile. Civilian traffic was banned. Military police controlled intersections. Speed limits were ignored. Drivers pushed their trucks to mechanical limits and beyond, knowing that every hour of delay meant American tanks sitting immobile, burning through fuel reserves while German forces reorganized defenses. The pressure was immense. Transportation Corps officers posted signs reading, "Is this trip necessary?" implying that any delay, any deviation from approved routes, wasted resources that soldiers needed to stay alive. Corporal Jimmy Dalton drove for the 3348th Quartermaster Truck Company, a unit composed primarily of black soldiers commanded by white officers, standard practice in the segregated Army of 1944. Dalton was 26 years old, raised in rural Tennessee, and had driven logging trucks through Appalachian mountain roads since age 16. He knew vehicles the way some men knew scripture. He could diagnose engine problems by sound, predict mechanical failures from subtle vibrations, and navigate backcountry roads using nothing but terrain sense developed through years of mountain driving. His company operated 36 trucks and had been running red ball missions for 4 days. Each mission followed identical patterns: load cargo at forward supply dumps near Chartres, drive 140 miles to Third Army positions near Troyes, unload, return empty, reload, repeat. The round trip took 18 hours when everything functioned perfectly. It rarely did. Trucks broke down. Convoys bunched up at bottlenecks. Drivers fell asleep at the wheel. German aircraft strafed columns occasionally. And always, the pressure to move faster, carry more, accept no delays. The official routes made sense on maps. Highway N23 ran straight through the Beauce Valley, flat agricultural land ideal for convoy operations. Clear sight lines, hard-surfaced roads, towns spaced conveniently for rest stops. Transportation Corps' engineers had surveyed the route personally and declared it optimal. Deviation was forbidden without approval from convoy commanders, who received their orders from division headquarters, who coordinated with Corps logistics, who reported to Army supply officers. The system was hierarchical, inflexible, and designed to prevent chaos. Dalton didn't question the system initially. He drove where ordered, carried what was loaded, followed the truck ahead, and trusted that someone with more information had planned things correctly. But on August 26th, during his second Red Ball mission, he noticed something that triggered instincts developed on Tennessee mountain roads. The main highway showed signs of recent reconnaissance. It was subtle. Tire tracks near the WWII, roadside that didn't match American vehicle patterns, broken brush in areas where there was no reason for vehicles to leave the road, fresh dirt on pavement in spots that suggested someone had cleaned up evidence hastily. During a rest stop near Bonneval, Dalton mentioned these observations to his platoon sergeant, who dismissed them immediately. "We got air superiority, Corporal. Krauts can't move daylight without getting strafed. Quit seeing ghosts." But Dalton couldn't shake the feeling. German forces were retreating, yes, but retreating didn't mean defeated. Intelligence reports, the ones drivers occasionally overheard from officers' conversations, mentioned German paratroopers organizing behind Allied lines, small units, highly trained, avoiding contact with frontline forces while targeting supply columns. Ambush tactics, hit convoys, destroy trucks, fade into countryside before reinforcements arrived. The reports were vague, unconfirmed, and certainly not shared with truck drivers who were expected to drive, not strategize. On August 28th, Dalton's company received orders for a major supply run, a full battalion movement, 12 truck companies, 432 vehicles total, carrying 2,400 tons of critical supplies. This wasn't routine. It was the largest single convoy assembled for Third Army since Red Ball began. The cargo included aviation fuel for tactical air support, 105mm artillery shells, medical supplies for forward hospitals, and K-rations for infantry divisions. Patton's headquarters had requested emergency delivery. Speed was essential. Delays were unacceptable. The convoy would depart Chartres at 0400 hours, reach Troyes by 1400, unload, and return. 10 hours. Highway N23 all the way, the fastest route. Company commanders briefed their drivers. Maintain 50-yard spacing, hold 35 miles per hour, no unauthorized stops. Military police would escort the convoy through intersections. Fighter aircraft would provide air cover during daylight hours. The operation was planned with precision that left no room for deviation. Dalton attended the briefing and said nothing, but his unease intensified. A convoy of 432 trucks stretched over 10 miles when properly spaced, moving through a single highway corridor. Predictable timing. Anyone watching could calculate exactly when the convoy would pass any given point, and those tire tracks he'd seen 2 days earlier suggested someone was watching. After the briefing, Dalton approached his company commander, Lieutenant Howard Patterson, a young officer from Pennsylvania who'd been with the unit 6 weeks. "Sir, request permission to discuss the route." Patterson looked up from his clipboard, already annoyed. "The route is Highway N23, Corporal, not subject to discussion." Dalton pressed carefully. "Yes, sir, but I've noticed signs suggesting German reconnaissance along that highway. There's an alternate route through." "An alternate route that adds 40 miles and 3 hours," Patterson interrupted. "Absolutely not. We have a schedule, Corporal. Patton doesn't care about your feelings. He cares about gasoline." Dismissed. Dalton should have dropped it. In a military hierarchy, arguing with officers was insubordination, but Tennessee stubbornness outweighed Army discipline. "Sir, I drove logging trucks in mountains for 10 years. I know terrain. I know ambush positions. That main highway runs through a valley with forest on both sides. There's a stretch near Brew where the road narrows and there's no escape routes. If someone wanted to hit a convoy, Corporal, they'd have done it already. We've run 50 convoys on that highway. 0 attacks. The Germans are running for the Rhine, not setting up ambushes. Now you're dismissed, and if you bring this up again, you'll be driving supply runs in the rear for the rest of the war." The threat was clear. Dalton saluted, returned to his truck, and sat in the cab, staring at the map he'd annotated. The alternate route he'd identified ran through smaller roads southwest of the main highway. Farm tracks, village streets, routes the Transportation Corps hadn't officially surveyed because they weren't necessary. The route added distance and time, but it avoided the valley entirely. It used terrain that offered better visibility, more escape routes, and fewer predictable choke points. From a tactical perspective, it was safer. From a logistics perspective, it was inefficient. And inefficiency was the unforgivable sin of military supply operations. At 0330 hours on August 29th, drivers mounted their trucks in darkness. The convoy formed up in numerical order, each company assigned specific positions. Dalton's 3348th Quartermaster Truck Company occupied positions 189 through 224 in the convoy, middle of the column. 36 trucks carrying mixed cargo, fuel cans, ammunition crates, ration boxes, standard load. Dalton performed his pre-departure inspection by flashlight, checking tire pressure, fluid levels, cargo security. Everything proper, everything by regulation. The convoy departed Chartres at 0400 precisely. 432 headlights cutting through pre-dawn darkness, engines rumbling in symphony, MPs waving them through intersections. The columns stretched back beyond visual range, a mechanical serpent feeding supplies to Patton's war machine. Dalton fell into the rhythm of convoy driving, maintain spacing, match speed, follow the truck ahead, think about nothing except the road immediate. At 0515, they approached the Y intersection where Highway N23 split from the secondary route Dalton had identified. A wooden sign, freshly painted with red balls, pointed traffic right toward N23. All 432 trucks ahead of Dalton turned right. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Protocol demanded he follow. Orders were explicit. Deviation meant punishment. But his instincts screamed that following. The main highway was suicide. The truck ahead disappeared around the bend onto N23. Dalton's turn approached. 5 seconds to decide. Follow orders or trust a hunch built on tire tracks and terrain analysis. His foot eased off the accelerator. The truck behind honked. Why was he slowing? Dalton made his decision. He jerked the wheel left, away from N23 onto the narrow secondary road that his map showed leading southwest. The truck behind him, driven by Private First Class Marcus Washington, followed automatically, assuming Dalton knew something he didn't. The truck behind Washington followed Washington. Within 90 seconds, 36 trucks of the 3348th Quartermaster Truck Company had peeled away from the main convoy, following Dalton onto an unauthorized route through the French countryside. Nobody had radioed for permission. Nobody had consulted the convoy commander. Dalton had simply turned, and his company had followed. 10 minutes later, when the company commander's radio crackled with furious demands for explanation, Dalton keyed his handset. "Sir, this is Dalton. I observed terrain that suggested ambush risk on N23. I've taken an alternate route. We'll rejoin the main highway at Brew." The response was immediate and volcanic. "You've done what? Corporal, you just committed insubordination that will land you in Leavenworth. Every truck in your company is off route, off schedule, and you have zero authority to make tactical decisions. You will reverse course immediately and rejoin the convoy." "Can't do that, sir. This road doesn't have turnaround space for 36 trucks. We're committed." That was partly true. The road was narrow. But the real truth was simpler. Dalton wasn't turning back because his instincts insisted he was right. "Then you'll proceed to Bro and wait for MPs to arrest you. Your driving career is finished, Corporal. Finished. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. Understood." Dalton released the radio mic and focused on driving. The secondary route was everything the main highway wasn't. Narrow, winding, rutted in places, passing through villages where sleepy French civilians stared at the American trucks rumbling past at dawn. His speed dropped to 25 miles per hour, painfully slow compared to convoy standards. The trucks behind him maintained spacing, their drivers confused but trusting. Nobody broke radio silence to ask questions. They just followed. At 0645, the convoy reached a crossroads near the village of Yevre. A French farmer stood by the road, waving urgently at the lead truck. Dalton stopped, and the farmer ran up, speaking rapid French. Dalton's French was minimal, but the farmer's pantomime was clear. Explosions, gunfire, many trucks burning. He pointed east, toward Highway N23, the route Dalton had abandoned. Dalton's blood went cold. He grabbed his radio. "All trucks, halt! Maintain spacing. Nobody moves until I figure out what's happening." He climbed from his cab and approached the farmer with the help of a driver who spoke basic French. Through broken translation, the story emerged. At approximately 0600 hours, a massive explosion and gunfire erupted along N23 near Brew, exactly where Dalton had predicted an ambush. The farmer had seen smoke rising in the distance. He didn't know details, but insisted the attack was large and ongoing. Dalton's hands shook as he refolded his map. His stupid route change had pulled 36 trucks and their crews away from an ambush. But 396 trucks, the rest of the convoy, had stayed on N23. He keyed the radio to the convoy frequency, needing to warn them. Static answered. No response. Either the convoy was under attack and not responding, or atmospheric conditions blocked transmission. He tried again. Nothing. Private Washington approached. "Corporal, what do we do?" Dalton considered options. Turn back to help? They had no weapons beyond sidearms. Trucks didn't carry crew-served weapons. Push forward to Troyes? That completed the mission, but abandoned the convoy. Wait for orders? From whom? He'd already violated every regulation. Making another command decision couldn't make things worse. We proceed to Troy, Dalton decided. We complete the mission. These supplies are critical, and sitting here accomplishes nothing. It felt like cowardice, driving away while other men potentially died. But it was also logical. His 36 trucks carried 15% of the convoy's cargo. Delivering that cargo served Patton's needs better than returning to participate in a battle for which they were unequipped. The company continued southwest, reaching Troy at 1100 hours, 3 hours late by original schedule, but present and intact. Supply officers at the depot stared in confusion as only 36 trucks arrived instead of 432. "Where's the rest of the convoy?" a major demanded. Dalton explained in terse sentences: ambush suspected, route change executed, other unit status unknown. The major's expression shifted from confusion to alarm, to something resembling respect. "You better be right, Corporal. If you're wrong, you've just destroyed your career over paranoia." Confirmation arrived 90 minutes later via radio transmission from division headquarters. At 0615 hours, German paratroopers from Fallschirmjäger Regiment 6, concealed in forest positions along Highway N23 near Bro, initiated a coordinated ambush against the Red Ball Express convoy. Panzerfaust rockets destroyed Lid trucks, blocking the road. Machine gun fire raked the stopped column from both sides. Mortar rounds targeted fuel trucks, creating fireballs that consumed surrounding vehicles. The ambush lasted 20 minutes before American infantry from nearby positions responded and drove the Germans off. The damage toll was catastrophic. 147 trucks destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. 18 drivers killed, 34 wounded. Cargo losses included 180,000 gallons of MiG aviation fuel, 400 tons of ammunition, and countless tons of rations and supplies. The Red Ball Express, designed to operate with mechanical efficiency, had just absorbed its worst single-day loss. Third Army's offensive operations, planned for September 1st, would be delayed 3 days while alternate supply routes reconstituted logistics. One company had escaped, the 3348th Quartermaster Truck Company. 36 trucks, 0 casualties, 100% cargo delivery, all because Corporal Jimmy Dalton had violated direct orders and followed a hunch based on tire tracks and terrain analysis. The reckoning came swiftly, but not in the form Dalton expected. Instead of court-martial, he received orders to report to Third Army headquarters. He arrived expecting arrest and found instead a brigadier general studying maps in a tactical operations center. The general looked up when Dalton entered. "You're the driver who disobeyed orders?" Dalton saluted. "Yes, sir." The general gestured to the map. "Show me your route." Dalton traced the secondary road he'd followed. The general studied it in silence, then looked at reconnaissance photos spread across the table. "Intelligence has confirmed that German paratroopers reconnoitered our supply routes for a week before executing this ambush. They chose that stretch near Brau specifically because it offered ideal terrain: forest concealment, clear fields of fire, limited escape routes. They calculated our convoy timing based on observed patterns. They predicted exactly when we'd pass through the kill zone." The general paused. "You predicted the same thing. How?" Dalton struggled to articulate instinct. "Sir, I drove logging trucks in mountains. You learn to read terrain, where landslides might occur, where roads get icy, where thieves might set up to hijack loads. The main highway felt wrong, too predictable, too channelized. If I wanted to hit a convoy, that's where I'd do it." The general nodded slowly. "You saw what trained intelligence officers missed. That's worth noting." He picked up a folder. "I'm not court-martialing you, Corporal. I'm promoting you to sergeant and assigning you to route security analysis. Your job will be identifying vulnerable points along our supply routes and recommending alternates. We're expanding Red Ball operations, and we need people who think like the enemy thinks." Dismissed. Dalton saluted and departed, stunned. His stupid decision had transformed from insubordination to innovation. But the victory felt hollow. 18 drivers had died. Men he'd known casually, seen at supply depots, waved to during convoys. His route change had saved his company, but couldn't save the others. The guilt would persist long after the war ended. The ambush near Brou forced comprehensive changes to Red Ball Express operations. Transportation Corps analysts reviewed every route for vulnerability. They implemented rotating schedules to prevent pattern recognition. They assigned armed escorts to convoys, infantry squads riding in protected vehicles. They varied routes daily, using secondary roads whenever feasible despite the efficiency costs. And they credited Sergeant Jimmy Dalton with identifying the threat doctrine that shaped these reforms. Statistical analysis revealed the scope of Dalton's impact. His 36 trucks represented 8.3% of the convoy, but carried 15% of critical cargo. Mission planners had front-loaded his company with aviation fuel. The 180,000 gallons lost in the ambush represented 2 days of tactical air operations. The 400 tons of artillery ammunition represented 6 hours of fire support. Had Dalton's company also been destroyed, the impact would have extended Third Army's offensive delay from 3 days to 5 days, potentially allowing German forces to establish stronger defensive positions along the Moselle River. More significantly, Dalton's route change demonstrated that rigid adherence to efficiency sometimes sacrificed security. The Transportation Corps had optimized routes for speed and capacity without adequately accounting for vulnerability to attack. After August 29th, doctrine shifted to balance efficiency with survivability. Convoys began using multiple routes simultaneously, accepting slightly lower throughput in exchange for reduced ambush risk. This multi-route doctrine remained standard through war's end. The human dimension mattered equally. Dalton's decision validated the importance of tactical judgment at every command level. He was an enlisted driver, the lowest tier of the logistics hierarchy, yet his terrain assessment proved more accurate than division intelligence. Post-action reviews emphasized that observation and common sense from personnel at all ranks contributed to mission success. The Army began soliciting feedback from drivers about route conditions, suspicious activity, and tactical concerns, input previously dismissed as irrelevant from non-command personnel. German documents captured later in the war confirmed the ambush's details. Fallschirmjäger Regiment 6, commanded by Major Hermann Friedrich Joppich, had inserted 6 platoons behind Allied lines with orders to disrupt supply operations. They'd observed Red Ball convoys for 6 days, mapped routes, identified the optimal ambush site, and positioned forces overnight. They'd expected to destroy or damage 200-plus trucks before withdrawing. They achieved 147, significant, but less than planned because one company inexplicably deviated from the standard route. German after-action reports noted frustration that unpredictability by a single American driver had reduced the ambush's effectiveness by 15%. The broader Red Ball Express operation continued through November 1944, ultimately delivering 12,193 tons of supplies over 81 days. At peak efficiency, 6,000 trucks moved 2,500 tons daily, barely sufficient for Third Army's needs, but remarkable given the logistical constraints. Operation faced constant challenges, mechanical breakdowns, driver fatigue, weather delays, and continued German harassment. But after August 29th, large-scale ambushes ceased. Varied routes, armed escorts, and unpredictable timing made convoy targeting too difficult for German forces to execute successfully. Individual drivers became the unsung heroes of the European campaign. While newspapers covered tank battles and infantry assaults, transportation soldiers drove 24-hour shifts through dangerous territory, sustaining offensive operations that doctrine assumed were impossible. The majority were black soldiers, segregated units assigned to support roles rather than combat. They received less recognition and faced discrimination both during and after the war. But without their contribution, Patton's advance would have stalled in eastern France rather than reaching the German border by September. Sergeant Jimmy Dalton continued his route security work through the war's end. He analyzed supply corridors across France and Germany, recommending alternates, identifying vulnerable choke points, and training officers in terrain assessment. His work remained largely invisible to higher command. Classified reports read by logistics staff, not celebrated in press releases. He never commanded large units or made strategic decisions, but his tactical judgment on August 29th saved lives and supplies at a critical moment. After the war, Dalton returned to Tennessee, resumed logging truck work, and seldom spoke about his military service. He attended one reunion of the 33 48th Quartermaster Truck Company in 1947, met the drivers whose lives his decision had saved, and found the attention uncomfortable. "I just drove a different road," he told a reporter who tracked him down in 1965. "Lots of people made bigger decisions. I got lucky." But luck implies chance. Dalton's decision was calculated based on observation and experience. He recognized patterns others missed, assessed risk when doctrine emphasized efficiency, and acted when action carried personal consequences. The Army initially called his decision stupid because it violated procedure. History called it brilliant because it saved lives. The gap between those assessments reveals how institutions sometimes prioritize compliance over common sense, and how individuals with judgment can bridge that gap when circumstances demand it. The ambush near Bro and Dalton's avoidance of it became a case study taught at logistics schools. The lesson wasn't about specific routes or terrain features. It was about empowering personnel at all levels to contribute tactical awareness. Drivers see things officers don't. Mechanics detect patterns analysts miss. Cooks hear rumors that intelligence networks ignore. The challenge for military organizations is creating systems that welcome this input rather than dismissing it as irrelevant. In the final accounting, Dalton's stupid route change embodied a principle that transcends military logistics. Expertise exists at every level, and dismissing input based on rank or position risks missing critical information. The lieutenant who called Dalton's concern feelings and rejected his alternate route had credentials, maps, and authority. Dalton had tire tracks, instinct, and experience. Credentials lost that debate. Experience won, and 500 trucks, counting Dalton's company plus the trucks in surrounding companies that would have been destroyed if the ambush had captured the entire convoy, survived because one corporal trusted his judgment over his orders. The legacy persists. Modern military logistics emphasizes situational awareness at all echelons, a doctrinal phrase that codifies what Dalton practiced instinctively. Today's convoys use multiple routes, varied timing, and feedback systems that incorporate observations from every participant. These procedures trace directly to lessons learned in 1944 when rigid efficiency doctrine met German ambush tactics, and one driver's stupid decision revealed the flaws in both. August 29, 1944. By sunset, the burning trucks near Bro had been extinguished, casualties evacuated, and damaged vehicles cleared from Highway N23. Supply operations resumed the next morning using alternate routes. Third Army's offensive continued, delayed but not derailed, and in the cab of a GMC Deuce and a Half rolling toward Troyes, Sergeant Jimmy Dalton drove in silence, carrying his cargo and his burden, the knowledge that 18 men died while he survived, and that he'd been called stupid for making the choice that mattered most. The trucks that followed him, 36 vehicles driven by men who trusted his judgment without understanding his reasoning, reached their destination intact. They unloaded supplies that kept fighters flying and artillery firing. They completed their mission. And in the chaos and carnage of World War II's logistics war, that completion represented a quiet victory worth more than any medal. The road, less traveled, saved lives. Sometimes the stupid choice is the smart one, and sometimes a corporal knows more than a colonel. History remembers the generals who won battles. This story remembers the driver who avoided one.